Welcome back to another episode of Trauma, Drama, and Life. I'm Ben Taylor.
And I'm Kayla Taylor.
And we're super excited to be here with you guys. If you haven't had a chance to be able to submit a question or interact with us, you can do so either going to ben@rawmotivations.com, send an email there, or you can DM us on Instagram. We can start adding some questions, different things to like the docket of particular questions that you want answered or particular experiences that you want us to go over as we continue to dive into our relationship, our marriage, and all the trauma, drama, and life that's happened and transpired since then. Well, one of the, I know in one of the people that like wrote in and kind of like had a couple like questions, they were asking along the lines of like, what were some of the red flags that you were seeing like either early in the relationship or like after marriage? What were some of the red flags that you noticed about being with a person like me?
I don't really think that there was like any major red flags when it came to our dating. I think that there may have, no, actually, I was going to say, like, I think there may have been one or two.
I was going to say, like, dating, I felt like I did pretty good job of, like, just being normal.
Yeah. There wasn't anything, like, out of the ordinary or anything like that that I would pinpoint. It mostly started happening more as soon as we got married, which I think...
Well, I was going to, actually, like, wait, with dating, like, wasn't there a time, the doctor's office?
Oh, well, I didn't...
Like that kind of like push-pull. I guess that wasn't like a red flag, but I mean, that was something like looking back that you're like, that's kind of creepy, right?
Yeah, I think that... So
I guess we should tell the story.
Yeah. So this was like before we officially started dating, because I was trying to think back like when it was. We weren't officially dating yet. It was... I had said something about, like, is this really, like, going to go anywhere or something like that. Like, I don't remember
You wanted to define it, I think.
Yeah, I wanted it to be just, like, defined because we had been talking for a long time and, like, going on dates, but they weren't really dates, but he was paying for my stuff. And so I was like, are we dating? Are we not? Like, what is this? And... like, I just didn't want to keep, like, wasting my time and, like, pursuing, like, getting to know him more in that aspect, like a dating way, if it wasn't going to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was like, he said something along the lines of, like, no, like, I just kind of view you as, like, a friend or a sister or, like, something like that. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And, like, I just took that and I was like, all right, peace. And, like, I didn't really talk to him, like, hardly at all anymore. And he would, like... text me, I guess, did we text back then? Was that even a thing?
We were texting back then. It wasn't the Stone Age. We're not that old, gosh.
Well, I mean, technically it was like 13
No, it was text
years.
Because I remember I had your number memorized because when I was with someone else and like texting you, I couldn't have your number in my phone.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because that was also like another thing. I was like, I'm not going to like continue to talk to you if you're still like half. It wasn't, you weren't like in a relationship, you were on a break, but you hadn't officially like broke it off. It was like the whole Ross and Rachel thing.
I love how we just had that video released about like Narcissist wants you to take a break, and like the cover had like the Ross and Rachel picture. It was kind of
so in his mind, he viewed the break as a breakup, but she viewed it as a break. And so I was like, if she doesn't know that y'all are like done, then you need to like confront her about that. And so first of all, and so he was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then I was like, okay, so then what does that mean for us? And then that's when he proceeded to say, well, I just view you as like a sister type thing. And I was like, okay. I was like, okay, that's cool. Totally received that perfectly fine. I was like, peace out. And I didn't really like talk to him hardly like at all. And that drove him nuts.
Yeah.
And so I guess it was like a good week. Like we hardly ever talked, but he had knew that I had like this eye doctor appointment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was like this eye doctor appointment. Yeah. And he was like trying to text me, but I was like giving him either like one word answers or like saying no, like I'm busy, or no, like whatever, just kind of brushing him off because
I just figured you were playing hard to get.
Yeah, apparently he thought I was playing hard to get. I was just like, okay,
right.
You're not interested in me, I'm not gonna waste my time. And so that would probably be, and so anyways, he ended up showing up afterwards at the end of my eye doctor appointment with like milkshakes. And I was like, oh, like I didn't think that it was like creepy at the time. I was like, oh, that's sweet. But like, what does that mean for us? And so then we like talked more about it, and then we started dating after like he
But
a few months after.
Didn't it kind of like, you know, like think something of like, how did he like find me? Because it wasn't like I
Well,
knew.
I did. I mean, I did ask you like how, and then he was like, well, I narrowed it down because you told me there was a like
right.
It was in this small town where I grew up, and so there was literally only 2 eye doctors at the time. It was like that one and then the one at Walmart. And he was like, I figured that you probably weren't at the one in Walmart.
Right.
And so then I was like, okay, like that makes sense, because at first I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense because it is a small town. But I think that if there would have been like multiple eye doctors, it probably would have been like a red flag of like, how, like, did you just like drive around and like try to figure out?
Stalking you.
Yeah. So then I would have been like really weirded out by that. But at the time, it didn't seem that way.
No, that makes sense.
So.
And
Plus,
then you were
I
kind
was
of mentioning
young, too.
like,
I was only like 18, 19.
True.
So I wasn't really like thinking like, oh, this guy is like some weird creep. I was like, I work with you. You're my best friend at the time. Like, I really thought of him as best friend because we had talked constantly.
Right.
And like hung out a bunch up until that point. Like once we started talking and like getting to know each other and stuff like that. And then that's when I told him, I was like, if you want to pursue anything with me, then you're going to have to like completely end it with her. And so like actually tell her that you're done, besides like this like break thing, because I'm not doing that. Like I'm not no.
Right. So then kind of like going in, like what was some of the like early stages and early thoughts of going into marriage, like the stuff that you started to see? Because I think you've recounted before in like podcasts is like going into marriage, you started to see stuff that was happening like right then and there. Like what were some of the red flags you saw like right away?
Just like on our honeymoon, of how he got like super snippy immediately, and I was like, this is weird. Like, why are you like so snippy? Like, and I just thought maybe it was because there was like, we were getting a ton of sun because we honeymooned in the Bahamas, and he was like stubborn.
I didn't listen.
And he didn't listen and didn't
put
on sunscreen. So like he had like sun poison. Yeah, like he had sun poisoning. And so I was like, I just contributed as like his snippiness, like being like, okay, he's in pain, so it's it's fine. So but then it just like kept getting like worse and worse, and like the arguments started getting like more ridiculous, and I was just like, what? And so that's when I started like slowly like shutting down, because I was like, well, this is weird because we weren't like this when we were dating, but I was like, is this like how it is because now we live together and now like we're married? Like he would nitpick at like every little thing that I would do. And I remember there was like one time, I mean, I mentioned this in a previous podcast, but I'll mention it again, that I made like a meal for him that his mom makes and that he likes.
Just the noodles?
Yes. And I bought the exact same thing because I made sure that it was like every single thing was correct, like the same noodles, the same everything. And I like made it correctly, and then he was like, this is not as good as my mom's, and those are the wrong noodles. And I was like, they're not the wrong noodles. Like, I asked your mom like if these are the correct noodles, and she verified that they were. And so it was just like, but he would not let that go. Like that was probably brought up for like a good solid like 3 or 4 months. And I was just like, okay, I'm never making that meal for you ever again. Like, trust me, I got the memo. I'm not, still to this day, I've never made that meal.
So, yeah, I don't think you've made it since then. Like, we've always had it when like parents come in.
Yeah, so like when his mom and stuff comes in, I'm like, you can make it. But still to this day, like, I'm just like, nope.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of the early signs and like the red flags that a lot of people miss are different pieces that are so small and so like subtle that it doesn't really seem like the other person's like attacking, or it doesn't really seem like the other person's being that rude or that mean, but it's like, it's small things.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone actually earlier today in like a one-on-one, and kind of like talking about like the foundation of marriage and the foundation of people actually being able to grow, change, develop, like become like who they're supposed to be. And it's like all those small pieces that make up like that compound to be like a healthy relationship or like a healthy marriage.
Yeah.
And early on, it's like the marriage took that turn by what I was doing. But then in my mind, I had to be able to twist it and change it to make sure that it wasn't my fault. It had to be someone else's. It had to be yours. Like, it had to be like you as like that, so I could be the victim and saying like, hey, it's not me. Like, it's your fault.
Yeah, because you were never wrong in the beginning of our marriage. Like, I could literally prove him flat out that he was wrong, and he would still say, no, that's exactly what I said. Or he would say something like switch it or something. And I would just be like, in that moment, I'd be like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do at this point.
Like, that's what I said.
Like I could come back with like every single logic, and I would know for a fact that he was like, that is not what he said. And I could be so logical and be like, this is the time that I'm going to for sure like have him be like, yeah, you're right. And it was maybe like 1 out of every 100th time you would finally like there would be like this one point where he really couldn't even like, no matter how he tried, like he wasn't going to be able to like defend himself or like put it back on me or put it back on whatever. And so it would be like that 1 in 100th time. And so, but the thing is like we're very logical people, and so that made it become more infuriating and like frustrating in our arguments. And if I knew that I was making a valid point and I knew that I was correct, then I like would get so mad because you would be like, no. Right. And then it would just like turn into this thing, and he would find like the one little flaw, like if I was just repeating myself, because it would just be like this big circle that we would go in. And if I would repeat myself and I would missay it like one time, he would be like, invalid, that's, you said it this way, and that cancels it all out, that's what you actually meant to begin with. Right. And so then that would just like frustrate me, and I'm like, you know what, whatever, I'm not going to even like continue this argument.
Because there's a lot of times like for me, but then also I've noticed just in talking about like narcissism, there's a lot of times that the logical piece of an argument is like, if I can invalidate one like tiny fraction of like what you're saying, then I can end up like manipulating conversation. I can end up being the one in control. I could be the one that wins. Yeah. Because then I'm like, oh, like, you know, out of the 100 things you said, there was like 0.5 that was actually wrong. So therefore all the 100 things you said don't count.
Right. Yeah.
From your perspective now, like looking back, what would you say to someone when they feel like they're in that type of a situation where like every time they try to say something, like the other person doesn't own up, they don't admit to it, they don't, because a lot of people are at the place where they're like, I keep trying to hold them accountable, but they won't admit that they're wrong, or they won't admit what they've actually done.
I think that the best thing is just for your sanity is just to like back down, like, and I'm not saying that as like back down and be like the weak, like try to say like, oh, I'm the weaker person or like whatever, but in that aspect, like thinking back, like if I would have just backed down half the time, then it wouldn't have escalated a lot of times to like the arguments that we got to. And not that I should be like not holding my own, but there's comes a point to when it's not worth it. It's not worth the mental toll that it takes on you. It's not worth you questioning yourself or your or your sanity or anything. It's not worth any of that. And I think and there was a turning point, like I guess it was probably like a year or so before we separated that I came to that conclusion. And there would be times that I wouldn't even put up a fight. Just like, okay, like whatever. And then he would be looking for the fight, and he'd be like, aren't you gonna say anything else? Like, aren't you gonna do this? Like, aren't you gonna? I'm like, no, like it's just it's whatever. Like
almost like gray rocking.
Right. And so I would just be like, you know what? It's not worth it.
There's something to be said at that time when you get to the place, not that you like roll over and don't care, but when you're at the place of saying like, hey, this no longer is going to control me, or is it going to affect me, or is going to trigger me to the place that I'm going to react or respond in like a negative way. Because I think sometimes even people like hearing that, there's going to be some being like, oh, well, yeah, you should just like roll over and let them like run over you. But there's definitely a piece of that you got to the place where I wasn't able to roll over you. Like I wasn't able to push your buttons and get your reaction, but then I also wasn't able to push you to like do what I wanted you to do. Like you started standing your ground, and then even more so, you know, when you got to the place where you left. But I think that there just becomes a point to when you're just like, okay, I know that I am not mentally insane like I think I am, or like he's making me out to be. And you, at that point, you hold your own more by not feeding into what they want you to do than you do actually like feeding them, because that's what they want. They want you to like get all like
wound up and then react, and then they can make you feel like you're like, oh, see, you're the one who reacted, you're the one who did this, you're the one. Right. So, and then puts it back on you. Whereas if you just don't do anything and you're just like, okay, then it's like, then it's going to get to them more, and they're just going to try to like nitpick, and then she's going to be like, okay, doesn't bother me.
Right.
And then that's just going to make them mad. They'll just eventually sulk and go in their own way, but...
And you have to remember, too, like, whatever situation that you're in when you're listening to this, it might be different than ours. Like, every situation is different. So, like, take with a grain of salt, but also, like, go into whatever you decide to do, being really careful and being really conscious of that other person, how they interact, how they respond, how they rage, because we don't want to say anything here that puts someone in, like, a negative.
Like, if you're in physical, thing. Like, if you're in an actual, like, physical abusive relationship, I wouldn't sit there and say, like, don't defend yourself. Like, that's completely different.
Right.
I'm talking about like emotional, like verbal abuse. That's what I'm talking about here. Just disclaimer.
So there's that piece that we're trying to like be able to identify that like you're typically not going to win an argument or like justifying with a narcissist. Like it's always going to go back to them. They're always going to be right. Like there's not going to really be this piece of like, oh yeah, like I got them,
Right.
And so many people look for that. They look for the piece of like, oh, how do I get the narcissist? How I figured out. I was thinking like when you were talking about like some of that dynamic, just of like trying to argue with a narcissist or trying to be able to be proved right. Whenever we were walking the other day and we were going past that one restaurant and you were like, it's Tex-Mex. And I was like, no, it's Mexican, remember? And like, so we were on a date night and we were walking and we were going past this restaurant and I was like, oh, it's like a Mexican restaurant. And I don't remember how the conversation exact went, but I was sure that it was Mexican, and then she was sure that it wasn't Mexican, or at least wasn't all Mexican kind of thing.
It was like a Tex, like I thought. So I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that I thought it was like Tex-Mex where they had like other things that wasn't 100% Mexican, but yeah.
So we walked up to it and we look at the menu, and lo and behold, I was less right. I'm just kidding. So I was wrong. It wasn't just Mexican. They had a whole bunch of other things on there and a bunch of other things on their menu. And so we like started looking through the menu, and Kayla turns to me and she's like, can you admit that I was right, kind of thing. And so then I was like, okay. And then I think it was something like,
you saw tacos and
I saw tacos. Yeah. So it was definitely Mexican. But you were like, okay, well, I see the tacos, and then there's all this other stuff. Like, we could split, like, 50-50 kind of a thing.
Right.
And you remember what I asked you then? Like, right after? I was like, can I be
51%?
Exactly. I was like, can I be 51% right? And you were like, sure, whatever. And I was like, sweet, I'm right. Because in that moment, like the thought process, like I know that's a funny example, but like the thought process in like the narcissistic brain is like, since I'm 51%, that means I'm like 100% right. Now, I'm not at the place where I'm like treating it abusive, like, oh, you were wrong, but I'm at the place of like in my mind, it wants to automatically go there, that because I have that 1 extra percent, like I'm actually right, even though like I'm technically wrong because it's not a Mexican restaurant. But like that's just like gives like an idea from, I would say, from where we are, more of like a healthy standpoint of like what's actually going on in the dynamic, even though that's a funny illustration, the dynamic of what's happening.
Because that interaction would have turned into like this gigantic argument, and we would have gotten mad and like been done.
Right.
Would have been like, okay, bye. Like, we still have like 3 hours on date night, but who cares? Goodbye.
Right. Like, we're done with this.
Done with you.
Because I was not right and you didn't validate me that I wasn't right. Like that kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you're in a conversation with a toxic person, like, be really careful, because there's no winning when you're battling someone, that is not going through the logic and is not going through. It's kind of like, I want to say, like, define the laws of gravity, but, like, that's not the right way to be able to put it. But it's, like, someone who's actually, like, not engaged with reality. I mean, that's really, it's the mask, the false persona, like all the things, like not engaged with the reality of like, you could be telling me I'm 100% wrong, and I could be like, no, I'm right. And it, that's because I'm not adhering to reality. And that's that piece that, oftentimes we talk about, and like, we'll talk about more even on this podcast, of like acknowledging the truth, because that piece is one of the hardest pieces for me, for survivors, for narcissists, for anybody to actually come to the terms with and be like, this is the truth. This is what I actually have to believe in order to grow, heal, change, and develop.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's the podcast for today. Hopefully you guys liked it or took something out of it. If you want to hear more of these and specifically want to have a question answered or want to hear more perspective about anything, we're not just limiting this just to narcissism. There's a piece that everybody wants to hear about narcissism because obviously Kayla is with a narcissist, but there's also the aspect of like we have a lot of other pieces of life that happen, just like date night, trying to help people just get a perspective of a lot of different things. We talk to a lot of different people all over the globe that's dealing with narcissists or toxicity or marriage issues, parenting issues, like all different aspects, just trying to help people as we move forward through crazy life and try to help people move forward with crazy life for them as well.
Yep.
So anyways, thank you guys so much. Tune in next week.
And we'll see you guys later.